All right, here we go with objective 64, solving quadratic equations using square roots. So today we're going to talk about another way of solving these quadratic equations, and I argue it's a little bit easier than what we've learned in the past. We're going to revisit some of the ideas that we learned in the previous unit on radicals when we're talking about square roots. Let's take a look at this first example. We have x squared minus 8 equals 17, and we want to solve for x. That means get the variable by itself. So right now I see we have a minus 8. To get the variable by itself, we first have to add 8 to both sides. So when we add 8, we have 17 plus 8. That gives us 25. So we get x squared equals 25. So we don't quite have the variable by itself yet. We don't have x, we have x squared. So in order to solve this, I want to take a look back at how we would solve this equation. We have the square root of x equals 4. Remember, in order to solve this radical equation, we have to do what's called the inverse operation. So I see that right now we have the square root of x. We want just x. So the inverse of the square root is a square. So these are inverse operations. So remember, when we would solve this, the square and square root would cancel, and then all that's left is x equals, and then 4 squared is just 4 times 4, which gives us 16. Now, let's use that idea and revisit this over here. We've got x squared equals 25. Well, we have to use the inverse operation. Like I said, the square and square root are inverse operations of one another. So to get rid of the square, we're going to square root both sides. So again, on the left-hand side, we have the square and square root cancel, and we're just left with x. And then on the right-hand side, we have the square root of 25. So you might remember back to simplifying radicals, we can use the jailbreak method. So we can break 25 into its factors of 5 and 5. And then using the jailbreak method, we pull out pairs. So I see a pair of 5s, we can pull that out. So we have 5. There's nothing left on the inside of the radical, so we don't have to write it. And so we get the solution, x equals 5. Now that's only half of the solution, and we're going to see today why that's the case. Looking at our definition, we're going to talk about solving quadratic equations by square roots. Solving quadratic equations by square roots. So you can put a quick note, put a star next to this. You're only able to use this when you only have an x term, or x squared term. Only have an x squared term. Only able to use when you only have an x squared term. In other words, you cannot use this when there is an x squared and an x term. So when you have both an x squared and an x term, you cannot use this method. You can only use this method when there's just an x squared term. So taking a look at the first example down here, number 2a, I see that we have x squared equals 81. This satisfies that criteria. We've got just x squared. There is no x term. Okay? So in order to solve this, step 1 is to get the squared term, or the x squared, by itself. Get the squared term, the x squared, by itself. So revisiting 2a, I see we have x squared equals 81. Well, the x squared term is by itself. It's on its own side of the equal sign with nothing else along with it. So this one is good to go. Step 2 is to cancel out the squared term. And as a reminder, that's like x squared, by square rooting both sides. Cancel out the squared term by square rooting both sides. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to square root both sides. So the squared and square root term The squared and the square root cancel, so we have x equals the square root of 81. Well, you might recognize 81 as a perfect square. Something times itself equals 81. You might recognize that is 9. One quick note that I want to add here. So in step 2, say when you solve using square roots, your answer is plus or minus. So we're going to write that as like a plus over a minus. And what I mean by that is it's going to be both positive and negative. So this answer down here, what I'm saying here is that this answer should be plus or minus. Or in other words, the solution is x equals 9 and x equals negative 9. So both the positive and negative solutions. Well, why is that the case? Let's see what happens when we plug in each of these solutions back into our original equation. If we were to plug in positive 9, we have positive 9 squared equals 81. Well, positive 9 squared, that just tells us 9 times 9. Is that 81? Yes, it is. 9 times 9 is 81. If we were to plug in negative 9, we have negative 9 squared equals 81. Well, what's negative 9 squared? That's negative 9 times negative 9. Well, that also gives us a positive 81. So that also works. So when we're solving equations using square roots, your answer is both positive and negative. A lot of students forget the negative. They'll just put the positive. So be careful. Make sure you have both solutions. That's only half if you've got just one of them. Let's try one more. So here we have 2a squared minus 89 equals 9. Step 1 is to get the squared term by itself. So we're looking at the a squared. So to get it by itself, the first thing that we have to do is add 89 to both sides. So we're going to add 89. Well, 9 plus 89 gives us 98. So we've got 2a squared equals 98. We're not quite there yet. We have to divide by 2. And when we divide by 2, then we have the a squared by itself. So dividing by 2, we have a squared equals, well, 98 divided by 2 is 49. And then step 2, we cancel out the squared term by square rooting both sides. So now that we have the squared term by itself, we can square root both sides. And we get a equals, well, the square root of 49, let's go ahead and use the jailbreak method here. You might also recognize it's a perfect square. But the factors of 49, you can say 1 and 49, or you can break it up into 7 times 7. So we can pull those pairs out using the jailbreak method, and we're left with just 7. Again, our answers are both positive and negative, so plus or minus 7, meaning our solutions are a equals 7 and a equals negative 7. So we got to remember both of those answers. So a quick reminder, get the x squared term by itself and then square root both sides, and your answer is both positive and negative. We're going to get a whole lot of practice on this, so we'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day.